No one expected a millionaire to make such a deal, least of all the woman who had nothing. Richard sat in the back of his luxury car, watching the city lights blur past the rain-speckled windows. He wasn't a man prone to emotion, but tonight was different. His hands tightened around a single sheet of paper, the contract that could change everything. A few blocks away, Anna huddled under the dim glow of a street lamp, wrapped in layers of ragged clothing. The cold bit at her skin, but she was used to it. Hunger, exhaustion, and the whispers of strangers passing by were a constant presence in her life. But tonight, something felt different. The car pulled up beside her. The door opened, and a man in a tailored suit stepped out. "Miss, my employer would like to speak with you." His tone was polite but firm. Anna hesitated, her instinct screaming at her to run. But curiosity won. She slid into the car cautiously, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the soft leather seats. Across from her sat Richard, his gaze steady, his expression unreadable. He studied her for a moment, before sliding the contract across the seat. "I want you to have my child," he said, his voice calm, controlled. "In exchange, you'll never have to worry about money again." Anna blinked, convinced she had misheard. A soft chuckle escaped her lips, but Richard didn't laugh. He was serious. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because you have nothing to lose," Richard said simply. "And I need someone who won't ask questions." The words stung, but they weren't wrong. She had nothing. No family, no future. But carrying a stranger's child? It wasn't just about the money, something about this deal felt strange. Still, hunger gnawed at her. Desperation was louder than doubt. She took the pen and signed her name. Richard nodded, satisfied. "You'll be taken care of," he assured her. "Medical care, a safe place to live, everything you need." Anna should have felt relieved, but as the car drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped into something far bigger than she understood. She just didn't know how much her life was about to change. And neither did Richard. The first few weeks passed in a blur. Anna found herself in a world so different from the streets she had known. She now lived in a spacious apartment, where warm meals arrived on schedule, and a private doctor monitored her health. At first, she told herself this was just a business arrangement. She would have Richard's child, take the money, and leave. But there was something about this whole situation that didn't sit right. Richard rarely visited. When he did, he never asked how she was feeling, only about the progress of her pregnancy. His questions were precise, clinical, almost cold. "Are they running all the tests I requested? Any unusual symptoms? Did the doctor mention anything different?" Different? Anna brushed it off, thinking rich people were just eccentric. But then, the tests started becoming more frequent. At first, it was just routine ultrasounds. Then blood work, genetic screenings, even neurological scans. She asked the doctor about it, but he only gave her vague answers. One day, after yet another round of tests, Anna overheard the medical team talking in hushed voices outside the examination room. "I've never seen results like this before. Should we tell him?" "Not yet. Not until we're sure." The hair on Anna's arms stood on end. She wasn't a scientist, but she knew when people were hiding something. That night, as she lay in bed, she placed a protective hand over her stomach. What was happening to her baby? The next morning, she confronted Richard. "I want to know the truth," she said, standing firm. Richard sighed, rubbing his temples as if weighing his words. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "This child may be the only hope I have left." Anna stared at him, confused. Hope for what? But before he could answer, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, his expression tightening. Without another word, he stepped away, leaving Anna standing there, alone with more questions than ever before. That night, she made a decision. She was done waiting for answers. She was going to find out the truth, no matter what it took. Anna couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind raced with questions. What did Richard mean when he said the child was his only hope? What were the doctors seeing in the tests that they refused to explain? She waited until the apartment was silent, then slipped out of bed and into the hallway. The private clinic Richard had set up for her was just down the hall. She had seen the doctors enter it at all hours, but she had never been inside alone. The door was locked. Of course, it was. Anna's heart pounded as she jiggled the handle, but then she noticed something, the keypad on the side. A smudge of fingerprints covered 4 numbers. Holding her breath, she pressed them in different combinations until she heard a soft beep. The door clicked open. The room smelled like antiseptic, the kind that reminded her of hospital corridors. Computers lined the walls, and rows of folders sat stacked on a desk. She rushed to the files with her name on them. Page after page of medical data stared back at her, words she didn't fully understand. But one phrase stood out. Genetic anomaly detected. Her stomach twisted as she flipped through the papers, scanning for answers. Then, a section caught her eye, one labeled projected developmental traits. There were notes scribbled in the margins, but the only word she could make out was impossible. A sound made her freeze. Footsteps. She barely had time to close the file before the door swung open. Richard stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be in here," he said quietly. Anna gripped the edge of the desk, her pulse racing. "What's wrong with my baby?" Richard sighed and closed the door behind him. He didn't look angry. If anything, he looked tired. "There's something you need to know," he said, stepping toward her. "Something I never told you when we made this deal." Anna's breath caught in her throat. "This isn't just about having a child," Richard continued. "It's about who this child will be." The weight in his voice sent a chill through her. Anna had been desperate when she signed that contract, but now, standing in that cold, sterile room, she realized something. She hadn't just agreed to have a baby. She had agreed to something much, much bigger. Anna's hands trembled as she clenched the file against her chest. "What do you mean who this child will be?" Her voice was steady, but inside, fear coiled around her ribs like a snake. Richard exhaled sharply and rubbed the back of his neck. "I should have told you from the beginning," he admitted, stepping closer. "But I needed you to agree before you had a reason to walk away." Anna backed up a step. "Walk away from what?" Richard hesitated, his fingers tightening into a fist at his side. "My family, we've always been different. For generations, there's been something in our bloodline that no one can explain. A mutation, they call it. Doctors, scientists, they've studied us, but they've never fully understood. My father had it. His father before him. But somewhere along the way, it started fading." Anna swallowed hard. "What are you saying?" Richard met her eyes. "I'm saying that whatever made my family special is dying out. And I'm the last one left." A cold silence filled the room. Anna shook her head. "So, what does this have to do with our baby?" Richard hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Because I think this child is bringing it back." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her. "Bringing what back?" she demanded. Richard stepped forward, his eyes burning with something she couldn't quite name. Strength. Intelligence. Something beyond human. Anna's mouth went dry. "This baby," Richard continued, "is different. The tests show it. You've felt it, haven't you? The way your body's changing, the way the doctors won't tell you everything." She had. She had felt it, the strange energy in her veins, the way her heart sometimes beat in odd rhythms, the dreams that felt more like memories of things she'd never seen. "You don't understand," Richard said, his voice urgent now. "This isn't just about me. If this child is what I think they are, then others will want to know. And they'll do anything to take them." A chill ran down Anna's spine. She had agreed to carry a millionaire's child. But she hadn't agreed to this. She turned toward the door, her body moving on instinct, but Richard grabbed her wrist. "Anna," he said, his grip firm but not cruel, "this child is already more than either of us can imagine. And now that we know, we have to protect them." Anna's breath came fast. Richard wasn't just talking about doctors anymore. He was talking about something bigger. Something darker. Something she hadn't signed up for. Anna yanked her wrist free, her heart hammering. Protect them? From who? Richard's jaw tightened. From people who won't see this child as a miracle. From people who will see them as a threat. A cold shiver ran down Anna's spine. The way he said it, the way his eyes darkened, sent a clear message. There were people out there who already knew. People who were watching. She pressed a hand to her stomach. The life growing inside her was more than just a baby. It was something different. Something people would either worship or destroy. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard shook his head. "I don't know. Not exactly. But my family, we've been monitored for years. Scientists, corporations, maybe even the government, I've never been able to trace it back to one source. But I know they're real." Anna swallowed hard. "You knew this would happen. You knew, and still. I didn't have a choice." Richard's voice was sharp now, edged with something raw. "You don't know what it's like, living with the knowledge that you are the last of something. That one day, it all ends with you." His hands curled into fists. "I thought maybe the mutation was gone, that it had faded too much to pass on. But this child, they're different." Anna's pulse pounded in her ears. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in. "So what happens now?" she asked. Richard hesitated. "I have people who can help. People who can keep you safe. But we need to move. Tonight." Anna flinched. "Move?" "They know," he said, his voice grave. "They've been watching the test results. I saw the encrypted messages between the lab and an outside source." Anna felt her legs go weak. "You're saying someone already?" A loud crash outside the door cut her off. Her breath caught. Richard turned, his body tense. Then came the sound of footsteps. Heavy. Purposeful. Anna grabbed his arm. "What do we do?" Richard didn't answer. Instead, he reached into the drawer of the desk and pulled out something small and black. "A gun." "Get behind me," he murmured. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. Anna's hand trembled as she clutched her stomach. Then, a loud bang as the door burst open. Anna screamed. And everything changed. The room exploded into chaos. Richard moved fast, shoving Anna behind him as the door swung open. A man in black tactical gear stepped inside, his face hidden behind a mask. His eyes locked onto Anna's stomach for a brief second before shifting to Richard. "Come with us," the man ordered, his voice calm but firm. "Now." Richard didn't hesitate. He raised the gun and fired. The first shot missed, striking the doorframe. The second hit the man's shoulder, sending him staggering back with a grunt. But before Richard could take another shot, two more figures appeared in the hallway. Anna's pulse pounded. This wasn't just a robbery. This wasn't some random attack. These people were here for the baby. Richard grabbed her wrist, pulling her toward the back of the room. "There's another way out," he said under his breath. But the men were already moving, closing in fast. One of them lunged for Anna, and she barely had time to react before Richard stepped between them, slamming his fist into the attacker's jaw. The man stumbled but didn't fall. Instead, he reached into his jacket. A sharp crack echoed through the room. Anna gasped as Richard's body jerked back. For a moment, everything slowed. Richard stared down at his chest, his hand pressing against the spreading red stain on his shirt. His lips parted as if he wanted to speak, but no words came out. Anna's scream ripped through the air. She reached for him, but strong arms grabbed her from behind, yanking her backward. She kicked, clawed, fought, but the grip was like iron. "Get her in the car," someone ordered. "No. No, please," Anna thrashed, but it was no use. They dragged her out of the room, past Richard's crumpled body. His eyes met hers for one brief, agonizing second. Then the door slammed shut, cutting him from view. She was shoved into a waiting vehicle, the door locking behind her. The last thing she saw before the car sped away was the glow of Richard's apartment window, growing smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the night. Tears blurred her vision. She had no idea where they were taking her. But one thing was clear. This wasn't about money. This wasn't even about Richard. It was always about the baby. The car sped through the dark streets, the city lights flashing past in a blur. Anna's breath came in ragged gasps as she struggled against the seatbelt, locking her in place. The man beside her, still masked, didn't speak. Neither did the driver. The silence was worse than the chaos. It meant they weren't worried. It meant they were in control. Anna's mind raced. Richard was shot. Was he dead? Had they left him there to bleed out? Panic threatened to choke her, but she forced herself to focus. She had to stay calm. Not just for herself. For the baby. The masked man finally spoke. "You'll be safe where we're taking you." Anna let out a bitter laugh. "Safe? You just killed the father of my child and kidnapped me. Forgive me if I don't believe you." The man didn't respond. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small syringe. Anna's stomach lurched. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, please." Before she could finish, he grabbed her arm, pressing the needle into her skin. A cold sensation rushed through her veins. The world tilted. Her body felt heavy, her limbs sluggish. She fought to keep her eyes open, but the darkness swallowed her whole. She woke to the sound of beeping. Her eyelids felt like lead, but she forced them open. Fluorescent lights flickered above her, casting a harsh glow over the stark white walls. A hospital? No. Something else. She tried to sit up, but restraints held her down. Leather straps across her wrists and ankles. Panic surged through her. "Relax," a voice said from the corner of the room. Anna turned her head, her heart slamming against her ribs. A woman stood there, dressed in a white coat, clipboard in hand. But she wasn't just a doctor. There was something calculating in her gaze. "Where am I?" Anna demanded, her voice hoarse. The woman walked closer, setting the clipboard down. "Somewhere safe. You've been unconscious for almost 24 hours. We had to sedate you to make sure you didn't do anything reckless." Anna yanked at the restraints. "You have no right." The woman sighed. "You still don't understand, do you?" She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You were never in control. You never had a choice." Anna's blood ran cold. The woman straightened. "We've been watching Richard for years. He thought he could outsmart us. That he could control this." She shook her head. "But nature always finds a way." Anna's fingers curled into fists. "What do you want from me?" The woman smiled, and it sent a chill down Anna's spine. "We don't want you, Miss Taylor." Her eyes flickered to Anna's stomach. "We want him." Terror surged through Anna as realization set in. This wasn't about money. It wasn't even about Richard. It was always about the baby. And they weren't going to let her leave with him. Anna's body went rigid. Every nerve in her screamed to fight, to run, to do something, but the restraints held firm. The woman's words echoed in her mind. "We don't want you. We want him. Her baby." She clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stay calm. "You think I'm just going to hand him over?" The woman chuckled, shaking her head. "Hand him over," she repeated. "My dear, you were never meant to keep him." Anna's heart pounded. "I'll never let you take my child." The woman sighed, as if bored of this conversation already. She stepped toward a monitor and pressed a button. A screen on the wall flickered to life, displaying a grainy, black and white security feed. Anna's breath caught in her throat. Richard. He was alive. But barely. He lay in a hospital bed, wires and tubes snaking from his body. His chest rose and fell, slow and unsteady. His face was pale, drained of the fire and determination he always carried. He fought hard, the woman said, watching Anna carefully. But he didn't stand a chance. You both should have known better. Anna's throat tightened. Richard had been right. They had been watching. They had known all along. The woman pressed another button, and the screen switched to a different feed. This time, it showed a sterile medical room, a crib in the center. High-tech machines surrounded it, blinking with unreadable data. We will ensure the child gets the best care, the woman continued. The best training. He won't grow up on the streets like you, and he won't be burdened by Richard's foolish attachments. He will be more than either of you could ever comprehend. Anna's entire body burned with rage. You don't get to decide that. The woman tilted her head. Oh, but we do. Anna forced herself to breathe, to think. Fighting wasn't an option, not yet. She needed time. She looked at Richard's weak form on the screen, then at the crib. They hadn't taken the baby yet. Which meant there was still a chance. She turned to the woman, steadying her voice. At least tell me why. What is it about this baby that makes you think you have the right to take him? The woman smiled as if she had been waiting for this question. Because, she said softly, this child is the future. Anna's blood turned to ice. Before she could say another word, the door to the room opened. 2 men in black stepped inside. It's time, the woman said. Anna's breath caught. She wasn't ready. But they didn't care. They were going to take her baby. And she had no idea how to stop them. Anna's pulse pounded as the 2 men stepped toward her. The restraints on her wrists and ankles felt tighter now, suffocating her, trapping her. She thrashed against them, but the leather didn't budge. Don't fight, the woman said, her voice smooth, practiced. We both know you won't win. Anna ignored her. Her mind raced. She had to get out of here, now. One of the men reached into his pocket and pulled out another syringe. The sight of it sent panic surging through Anna's veins. No, no, please. She yanked at the restraints with everything she had, her muscles burning with effort. The bed creaked, metal straining under her resistance. The baby kicked inside her, as if sensing her fear, her desperation. The needle came closer. Anna did the only thing she could. She screamed. A raw, piercing sound ripped from her throat. It wasn't just fear, it was rage, it was defiance, it was survival. The lights overhead flickered. The machines in the room beeped erratically, their screens flashing warnings. The woman's expression shifted, confusion, then something else. Something close to fear. Anna didn't understand what was happening, but she didn't have time to think. The room shook. Not violently, not enough to collapse, but enough to send an unmistakable warning. One of the men cursed under his breath. The other hesitated, syringe frozen in midair. What's going on? The woman snapped. The machines beeped louder. The flickering lights cast jagged shadows across the walls. Anna's breath came fast. It's the baby. She felt it now, an energy, something pulsing from deep inside her. It wasn't just her heartbeat, wasn't just panic. It was him. The child they wanted so badly, the child they feared, was already fighting back. A burst of static exploded from the speakers in the room. The lights flashed one last time, then burst. Glass rained down. Sparks erupted from the ceiling. The men staggered backward, shielding their faces. Anna didn't hesitate. She wrenched her arms up, this time, the straps gave way. She tore at the restraints around her ankles, her movements wild, fueled by adrenaline. The woman's voice cut through the chaos. Stop her. Anna was already moving. She lunged off the bed, crashing into one of the men before he could react. He stumbled back, knocking over a metal tray. She ran. Her bare feet slapped against the cold floor as she bolted toward the door. The second man grabbed at her, fingers brushing her arm. Anna spun, slamming her elbow into his ribs. He grunted, doubling over. She shoved past him and threw herself through the door, into the dimly lit hallway beyond. The alarm started wailing. Anna ran. She didn't know where she was. She didn't know how many people were after her. All she knew was that she had to escape. For her. For Richard. For the child who had just saved her life.